Parts of the event are may be recorded and used by media outlets. Last time we had a reporter as part of our conversation. Well, actually, he was listening, but he wrote a nice article afterwards. At the end of this program, 7 p.m., our partner members will give announcements. All other participants are welcome to give announcements in the unmoderated discussion from 7 to 7:30. And that discussion will be whatever you guys want to talk about after 7. Finally, we'd like to recognize we're meeting on the ancestral lands of Native nations. In Wisconsin, there are 11 federally recognized Native American sovereign nations and one seeking to regain federal recognition. We acknowledge these indigenous communities who have stewarded this land through the generations, and we pay respect to their elders, past and present. With that, it's time to start, and here's Amy.
Thank you, Neil. Great job with all of our reminders. We have so much to get to tonight. We're going to jump right in. But before we get started, we want to hear from as many of you as are interested in participating. And the best way to do that with this many of us, if you want to ask a question or share a comment or a thought, please do put a question mark in the chat. That will be my cue to call on you. And then I welcome you to unmute and join the conversation. If you would like to contribute something, but you believe it's a little sensitive, or you would just not like your name connected to the thought or question, that is fine as well. Go ahead and send me a direct message. I will share the content of your question or comment, but not the author. All right, so we're going to break up the discussion this evening into 3 parts. Our first part is going to be about relationships, where we're going to discuss allyship. Our second part is going to be about durability of allyship and coalitions and movements, where we're going to highlight Dr. King. I know that many of us this month have hopefully participated in some function or took some time out to remember and honor the legacy of Dr. King. More about that in the announcements at the end of the program. But we're going to specifically talk about the last year of Dr. King's life, and what his ally relationships looked like, many of them, and how durable or not those relationships were. So that will be the second component of our evening. And then finally, we'll end with the importance of diversity in our coalitions. And spoiler alert, the question that we're going to propose is, who are we keeping out and why? And is that a good idea? So we're going to, it'll make more sense once we get there, but we're going to start with relationships and allyships. We're going to move into durability of allyships and relationships, and then end with the importance of diversity. All right. So the thing that may have drawn many of you to this discussion is the header. You can't have allyship without relationship. So we're going to begin with defining allyship. Is there one perfect definition that completely captures it? No, but we're going to talk about a couple and then use some do's and don'ts to frame our discussion. And I'm hoping it'll be really robust. So the first definition I like to start with, I have a couple. The director of diversity programs at Mayo Clinic defines the act of allyship as when a person of privilege works in solidarity and partnership with a marginalized group of people to help take down the systems that challenge that group's basic rights, equal access, and ability to thrive in our society. So I'll repeat that. When a person of privilege works in solidarity and partnership with a marginalized group of people to help take down the systems that challenge the group's basic rights, equal access, and ability to thrive in our society. It's not too big. It may let me put that in the chat. I will give it a try. All right, there we go. The second definition I want to take is out of the book, Me and White Supremacy. If you haven't read it, you've probably heard me recommend it. It's a really great read. It is not a long read. Week 3, it's broken down into 4 weeks. Week 3 focuses on allyship, and this book is by Layla F. Saad. And it says, allyship is an active, consistent, and challenging practice of unlearning and reevaluation, in which a person of privilege seeks to work in solidarity with a marginalized group. Allyship is not an identity. It is a lifelong process of building relationships based on trust, consistency, and accountability with marginalized individuals and or groups. Allyship is not self-defined. Our work and our efforts must be recognized by the people we seek to ally ourselves with. So I think there's a lot to unpack in both of those definitions. I am excited and curious to see if any of that resonated with you. If you have any questions, comments, etc. But to frame our discussion, and I'll put the link in the chat. So it's called A Guide to Allyship, and I will put the website in the chat. And they had some pretty good resources, so feel free to click on that and peruse as your schedule permits. But I want to frame the conversation in some of their do's and don'ts, and we can feel free to add our own. So it's a pretty lengthy list of do's and don'ts. I think a lot of interesting takes. So I will read the first couple and then put them in the chat so you can see them, and then open the floor for questions, comments, etc. And again, if you want to share, just go ahead and put a question mark in the chat, and that way I'll know to call on you. So we're up to 37 people, which is great. So we're not talking over each other. So if we're starting with the do's with respect to allyship, the first one is do be open to listening. Do be aware of your implicit biases, okay? So I am going to drop those first 2 in the chat and then open the floor if someone would like to share. So be open to listening and be aware of your implicit biases. Is this easy? Is this difficult? Have you tried it and you were wildly successful? Have you tried it and you failed and you have the courage to share that? I am going to pause and open the floor.
It's hard to be aware of our implicit biases. It's like the invisible knapsack that we carry along. And so we really have to work at figuring out what they are.
Neil, I appreciate you sharing that. And I would couple with that, if someone cares enough about you and the relationship that they have to you to gently point out what may be some of your implicit biases, we have to resist the urge to get defensive or overly sensitive, and try our best to receive that information and really process it and figure out what, if anything, we want to do to change that. So if someone is giving you feedback, I would encourage you to treat that as a gift and start by saying thank you, and then begin the work of processing that. Other comments or anything that resonated before we move to the next couple on the list of things to do if you are interested in allyship?
Yeah,
Janet, go ahead.
I was thinking how easy it is to be stupid about this kind of thing. when I was listening to Mitch McConnell say the other day, he was talking about African Americans voting, and then he said, he referenced American voters, like there's two different things, you know. And I thought, wow, I bet he could slap his face when he got done saying that. And I it's sad, and I hope we're not. I don't know how to end this statement, but I hope I'm not doing that. But it's easy to see how he could have done that.
Thank you, Janet. And that's, you have to, well, you don't have to. It is a good idea, in my opinion, to have people of diverse opinions and lived experiences in your circle. And they can gently, you know, call you in and say, you know, Janet, that comment you made, I don't know if you meant it this way, but this is how it could have been perceived. And you can accept or reject that information. But again, I would encourage you to take it as a gift and then start the work of processing it. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, who wrote these definitions? You came up with a couple of definitions.
The first definition was from, and I will mess up the name, so I'm not going to attempt it, but is the director of diversity programs at the Mayo Clinic. That's the definition that's in the chat. The definition that I read for you was out of Me and White Supremacy, Combat Racism, Change the World, and Become a Good Ancestor by Layla F. Saad. Week 2, it's broken down into weeks. There's 4 of them, begins with a study on allyship. All right.
After listening to the first definition,
yep,
my first response was, what the hell did he just say?
I appreciate you.
Absolutely nothing. It means nothing in the Native world when somebody comes out with that kind of stuff.
That's interesting. I want to dig more into that. Okay, so the first definition, which is in the chat, when a person of privilege, so they're talking about a person who holds white privilege, okay, works in solidarity and partnership with a marginalized group. Right. So that could be any non-white group. That could be LGBTQ, okay. That could be Black, Native American, exactly. So working with a historically marginalized group of people to help take down systems that challenge that group's basic rights. So if we link in Janet's comments, so being against voter suppression, that would be one example of basic human rights. Equal access. We all know that access is not equal across color lines, and the ability to thrive in society. So hopefully that was helpful.
That was helpful.
Oh, well, excellent. We're going to move on to the next 2 on the do list. So I will drop those in the chat.
Yeah, Amy.
Yes.
I was going to chime in with the second one about being biased.
Please, sir.
And my thoughts are, well, you have to be able to define what biased thoughts that you have, because being biased could go over many different topics, you know, saying, for instance, person coming out of jail and prison, being incarcerated, you know, people shun on those kind of people. But being able to take it step by step and understand the biased thoughts that we have for whatever reason, for whatever person, I think is the first key to allowing that person to understand their biased thoughts.
Thank you so much, Minister Bell. Very important point. And marginalized groups, so people who were formerly incarcerated, definitely I would consider as a historically marginalized group. So absolutely, thank you for highlighting that.
Thank you.
So as we move on to the next 2, the first in the list of do's, do research to learn more about the history of the struggle in which you are participating. And as Minister Bell just said, it could be about the history of struggle of formerly incarcerated people. It could be the history of Latinx people, Black people, LGBTQ people. Whatever the struggle is, educate yourself on this struggle. The next do on our list is do the inner work to figure out a way to acknowledge how you participate in oppressive systems. That one might be uncomfortable, and I think it links back to our unconscious biases. But how do you participate in oppressive systems? I'll pause in case anyone wants to comment on those next two. Angel, please go ahead and unmute.
Well, I consider we can participate in oppression by not doing anything. If we don't do anything,
is definitely participation. Yep. Angel,
I want
to unmute.
I want to add that we benefit from the oppressive system unknowingly.
I would say unknowingly and sometimes knowingly. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Just by functioning in our society, going back to the invisible knapsack that Neil referred to. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Peggy McIntosh article on white privilege, there's just so many privileges that we have as white people that we don't even acknowledge, and we benefit from it. You know, and marginalized people, our goal is to build the bridges so we can all have those privileges.
Which, thank you, Santo, for bringing that up. It depends on how you look at the privilege. If you see it as a zero-sum game, if I help you get something, then I may believe that's taking something away from me. And that makes it even more difficult to do that bridge work that you just talked about. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there is a question mark in the chat from Angel. Thank you for being patient. Please go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, I have a question about how you would define who is a marginalized group versus who is in the privileged group. Is it solely based upon like race or ethnicity? Or I know I've heard you say the phrase white privilege. Would there be white people that are a part of a marginalized group?
Thank you, Angel. Good point. So if we talk about intersectionality, so for the purpose of tonight's discussion, we are treating white people as a part of the privileged class that we're speaking about. I think that's how our society is structured. When we talk about white supremacy, which is different than white supremacist. So I want to be clear on that. But it is possible to be a part of a group. And because of intersectionality, which just basically means you don't have one singular identity and that's it. For example, I am a woman. I am also Black, et cetera, et cetera. Those are intersections of my identity. It is possible to be a part of a class that is privileged and have parts of your identity where you also experience oppression. So if we are saying that white people in our society have more privileges than others, well, what happens if you're white and you're also a member of the LGBTQ community? You hold privilege, but you could still also experience oppression. So Angel, hopefully that was helpful.
Well, isn't it possible to define both the marginalized and the privileged as just asking the simple question, would you change places with that person or that group?
I think that's a simple way to get to the heart of it. Yes. And if your answer is no, you might want to think about the reasons why you wouldn't change places. Absolutely. Thank you, Thomas.
Well, I'm a Hispanic immigrant. I wasn't born in America, but I wouldn't trade places. I don't want to be a white person. So I don't know if that means I'm not marginalized or what, or I'm in the privileged group, but I would not trade places. I'm thankful to be where I'm from.
No, Angel, that's critically important. I don't think that that means you're not marginalized. I would say from the way you just described yourself in our society, you would be considered marginalized and experience at least some level of oppression. But it's how you feel about your identity. So very quick story. My family is Black. I have a Black husband. I'm a Black woman. I have 2 Black children. My daughter, okay, let me try to condense the story. When she was 4, so that means our son was 6, we did summer trips. This is pre-COVID-19, et cetera. And we did a visit to the National Underground Museum. We did the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Texas, where Dr. King was assassinated. And we teach our kids about their history, et cetera. And 4-year-old Madison came bursting through the door on a summer day, and she shouts out, "Where's Dr. King?" And I looked at my husband, I said, "Oh my goodness, she thinks Dr. King is here." And I'm like, "Oh, I got this." So I get down on her eye level and I said, "Well, baby, Dr. King's not here." I said, "Dr. King was shot." And she, interrupts me and she goes, "Oh, does he go see Dr. Pete? Did he get a shot like I get a shot?" And I'm like, "Uh-oh, this isn't going well." So I look at my husband, he's like, "No, he got the shot." And I'm like, "You are not being helpful right now." And I said, "I got it. I said, Maddie, Dr. King was assassinated and he died. That means he died." And she looked at me like I was the stupidest person she had ever seen. And she said, "Then why are we here?" And at that point, I was all out of parenting tools. And I said, "To learn something. You're here to learn something." And so we brought our tickets and we proceeded through. And if any of you have ever been there, it is a beautifully done museum. And there is this part where you get to where they have the recreated buses from the Freedom Rides, and the way they're lit, they look like they're still on fire. And so, excuse me, my husband picks her up and she's looking on the inside and she's absorbing all this stuff. And they see like the Woolworths counters and where, Black people couldn't be served and et cetera. And I'm like patting myself on the back, like, aren't we good parents? We're exposing our kids at such a young age to all this history. Well, we get home. Couple days later, my 4-year-old comes up to me out of the blue and says, "Mommy, I don't want to be Black anymore." And my knee-jerk reaction was like, "Yes, you do. We love being Black." And again, she looked at me like I was the stupidest person she had ever seen. And she said, "Mommy, they kill Black people." And I said, "I know." And I scooped her up and I took her to her dad and I said, "Madison doesn't want to be Black anymore. Fix it." And I walked away, which is a very bad parenting move. Fortunately, my husband is brilliant. To this day, and a former history teacher. I have no idea what they discussed, but about 30 minutes later, my beautiful little 4-year-old came back, fist raised, and she said, "I'm Black and I'm proud." And I'm like, "Yes." So Angel, I completely get where that doesn't mean we're not oppressed, but we still really love being Black. And I think that's great. So you can be oppressed and not want to switch places with people and still be a part of a marginalized community. All right, I am going to stop talking for a moment. Last call for comments before we moved on the last 2 do's. So again, do research and learn more about the history of the struggle in which you are participating, and do the inner work to figure out a way to acknowledge how you participate in oppressive systems. Not easy, but definitely necessary. All right, we're going to move on to the next 2. Okay. Do the outer work to figure out how to change the oppressive systems. Okay. So what can you do? You acknowledge that a system is oppressive. What can you do to help change it? And don't say, "I'm one person, I can't do anything." That doesn't fly in courageous conversations. And number 2, do use your privilege to amplify. And I love that they put digitally and in person, historically suppressed voices. So what resonates, what comments, questions, reflections you have about the next 2? So how have you used your privilege to amplify either digitally or in person, or hopefully both, historically suppressed voices? And this goes back to the comment about silence and the importance of silence and how silence can be violent. Oh, I was uncomfortable, so I just didn't say anything. That felt kind of off, but it wasn't my place. I didn't want to ruin a relationship, and I didn't want to come off as a know-it-all, so I didn't say anything.
We can post things on our Facebook pages about things that are going on. So one of the things I want to do, have been going to do, is to say that during our celebration of Martin Luther King, we are now reading a book of his sermons called A Knock at Midnight. And it's one small way of listening.
Thank you for adding that, Neil. And I would only say, is please make sure, and this, whether you're showing up for people digitally or in person, and I know this is the case with you, Neil, but that the rest of your actions align with the thing you're posting or the thing you're saying to someone. So just make sure that there is congruence there. All right. Jean, you have a question or a comment? Please unmute.
Yes, I would just like to share. 5 years ago, when there was a presidential election that totally shocked me, I got in touch with a friend of mine from high school that I knew had differing views. And so, but we respected each other. And so we have been corresponding, emailing for the last few years and suggesting books that we can broaden our understanding, our awareness. And so it's been really an interesting experience. The last book that I shared with him was The Sum of Us. And I find that that author does an amazing job of explaining the Black experience that she has had and she's found in her research. She does it in a kind, honest, open way. And what I really appreciate about that book is the fact that she explains that a lot of the legislations are made perhaps, well, with a racial perspective that is not focusing on everybody within our country. She focuses on the fact that a lot of times our legislators are making decisions that hurt not only our Black Americans, but also a lot of our white Americans, the white Americans that are living in poverty. And so she's done an awesome job of indicating that instead of the sum of one person, it's how do we work to make it the sum of all people working together. So I highly recommend that book.
Jean, I do as well. If you haven't seen it, The Sum of Us by Heather McGee is really great. And she uses the analogy of the drained swimming pool. Yes. And so it's talking about public goods and who are public goods for. So when faced with integrating swimming pools, White officials decided we don't want Black people in our pools. We would rather drain the pools. And so you are harming everyone because you do not want to include Black Americans. You don't want to include Black people in public goods. And how often has that same sentiment been transferred into other areas? I am willing to cut off my nose to spite my face because I don't want you to have. So if you see things as a zero-sum game, if you get something, that means I have to give something up. Instead of envisioning public goods and lots of other things, is there's enough for everyone. How can we get more people access to things that are going to cause them to thrive? All right. Yep, go ahead, Janet.
I'd like to ask Jean what kinds of books her friends is urging her to read.
Well, the latest one he suggested was The American Experiment. It's written by Rubenstein. I was a little surprised that he had suggested that, but it does an amazing job of recreating our history and how traumatic our history has been throughout the throughout the United States history, and it does go into different situations with African Americans, and these are leaders within our country within the last 50 years. So it was amazingly more positive than I thought he would suggest.
Excellent. Jamie, I just want to acknowledge what you put in the chat. Thank you for being transparent. And yeah, that is difficult. Thank you for sharing. And unfortunately, that is a very real consequence of speaking up and against something that people have as a solidly held belief. So the next two do's, and we're gonna move a little quicker because we have lots of other good things in those second two sections that I want to get to. Do learn how to listen and accept criticism with grace, even if it's uncomfortable. And that could be a tough one, and you really have to be intentional about that. And do the work every day to learn how to be a better ally. Again, I just want to go back to the definition in Layla Saad's book. I'll read that again quickly. Allyship is an active, consistent, and challenging practice of unlearning and re-evaluating, in which a person of privilege seeks to work in solidarity with a marginalized group. Allyship is not an identity. It is a lifelong process of building relationships based on trust, consistency, and accountability with marginalized individuals and/or groups. Allyship is not self-defined. Please don't walk around and tell people what a great ally you are to the fill in the blanks. Let them say it about you. Our work and our efforts must be recognized by the people we seek to ally ourselves with. Okay, so hopefully that is helpful. The last two, nope, those were the last two on the do list. Let's jump into the what not to do. All right, so do not expect to be taught or shown. Take it upon yourself to use the tools around you to learn and answer your questions. Now, that's not saying that you can't learn from other people. You can ask questions, but for me, the key word there is expect. So please don't operate with a sense of entitlement. Very quick example, there was an acquaintance that I was in a conversation with, and I recommended this book to her because of the discussion we were having, me and white supremacy. This is a woman who happened to be white. And her response was, oh, good, I'll read it. And I'm going to call you with all of my questions. And I said, well, unless you're cutting me a check, no, you will not call me with all of your questions. I'm glad you mentioned that so we could get this cleared up before you began the book. So don't expect it. It's not that it won't happen or it can't happen, especially if you are in relationship with people. That seems pretty organic, but definitely don't expect it. And then the second on the do not list, do not participate for the gold medal in the Oppression Olympics. You don't need to compare how your struggle is just as bad as a marginalized person. And I could see how that second one might be born out of good intentions. I have been brought in to facilitate race and social justice work with groups, and you'll get the female that goes into most recently a white woman saying how she understands oppression because she's a woman. And she went on, and I gently interrupted her. And I said, yeah, I understand that too. I also am a woman. Try being a Black woman. So I get it's human nature. It's natural. Like, you know, oh, I had a bad day. Oh, that has happened to me too. But your struggles as someone of privilege is not necessarily the struggles of someone from a marginalized group. They may be similar, but don't assume they are the same. So hopefully both of those examples make sense. I will pause in case anyone has any comments or questions.
Yeah, I think we're back to my original statement about, would you like to change places with that person?
Yep. And just to remind us of Angel's comment, just because someone would not like to change places with someone does not mean that they are not oppressed or a part of a marginalized community. But Tom, especially if you're looking at it from a person with privilege, asking themselves that question, I think that's very appropriate. Any other comments or questions before we move to the next two on the do not list? Yep, Sarah, go ahead.
I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this to make sure I don't accidentally say something wrong, so to speak. I've been struggling with that as a teacher, that I'm trying to learn as much as I can about all of the students that walk through my doors, trying to learn, trying to, you know, amplify their voices, but then at the same time, not wanting to have that expectation, like you had mentioned, and trying to figure out, okay, how can I ask the students in my classes that do represent those, like, to what degree they're willing to help me understand more. I don't expect them to be the representatives, but I mean, last year, my best solution for a group was I said I had to some girls, I said that I found this wonderful book that I was given. Would you be willing or interested in helping me choose the poems of this book that think would represent your voice better? And then I thought, no matter what I say, it's going to be wrong because I'm not doing it quite right, but I want to try to, I mean, I can only do so much as a white woman that's, you know, middle class and trying to think what can I do? And it feels like it's a vicious circle of how can I learn more and do more, but not make a mistake.
So Sarah, I would just want to honor your willingness to try. And I love that you said, and I'm paraphrasing, that you want to learn everything you can about every student that walks through your door. I think that's a great place to start the work. One, take on that self-education piece. So don't put it on, especially a student, to be the teacher of you, of their lived experience, etc. But I don't think it's out of the realm or improper to say, hey, this is this resource that I found. This is why I think it'll be really good. Would you like to help pick some poems out of this? So the onus is not on them. They're not required or responsible for your learning, but they are a participant in what you want to bring to the table as an educator. So hopefully that is helpful. Angel, I see that you have a question mark in the chat. Please go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to clarify that the comment I made before, like I said it because I don't feel oppressed. I don't think I've never felt oppressed because of my race. And as a matter of fact, like I feel like I've gotten certain privileges, and like even when I went to college, I got certain money that wasn't available to my white friends because they were white, but it was made available to me simply because of the fact that I'm Hispanic. So that's just an example of it. So I that's why I say that is I've never felt depressed because of my race.
Angel, I love that is your experience, and I hope that continues. I think that's unfortunately very rare, but I'm really glad to hear that is your experience. So someone sent me a private message that says not wanting to be called out. Completely get that. No one wants to be potentially embarrassed or highlighted for not knowing something that someone else felt that they should know. But being an ally and being in relationship with people requires some level of courage. And you got to be willing, you know, to kind of paraphrase what Sarah said, you got to be willing to step in it and assume that not if it will happen, but assume that it will happen. And what will your response be? If you make a mess, clean it up and move forward. And is that comfortable? No. But is that how we learn? Yes. So I guess the question would be, how committed are you? All right, Lynn, you have a question mark. Go ahead and unmute if you would like.
Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't know how this works. Like I was going to type a bunch of stuff and then I hit return like you do when you normally write. So it just sent to you. So sorry about that.
No, you're fine.
So I guess I'm not turning the camera on because I'm not even comfortable on these screens always. And I didn't really know what this group was when I got the email exactly. But so I guess the only marginalized I'd say is I'm female and I have a very bad trauma past. So my problem with, like, I'm really good at speaking up for people and defending people if I'm like in 3D life, right? And like even when you, like, the hard part for me is it's such a toxic world out there, especially on social media. And I see white people speaking up and then being condemned for speaking up wrong, or saying like even when you say, and I totally understand, I'm not disagreeing, but if I were to say to you, I'm female too, and I have this struggle, I might be trying to relate to you instead of comparing, because I've always been taught, like, you don't compare trauma, you don't compare hurt, like, you know, somebody's hurt is no different than somebody else's hurt, or so I would never do that kind of thing. But like for me, I'm not good at being attacked myself. So like speaking up or saying something, I'm fully willing to do in person. It's a lot harder in social media situations because there's so many crazy like groups will come at you. And I get like, I have so much anxiety and like, I think it's like the trauma response, and I don't want to say the wrong thing. So sometimes I don't say anything. And then I get slapped with, well, if you don't say anything, that's violent too. And then it's like, fine, I just give up. I mean, it's like really hard to want to do the right thing, but you're fearful that you're going to do the right thing in the wrong way. And then you're going to get called out. And it just ends up being this big, messy, ugly, wanting so bad. Like, I just want everybody to, I almost said a F-bomb, sorry, get along and love each other. And like, I don't even understand like why it's so hard. It's so goofy to me that everybody can't just, like, we're all just people. And so I get caught up in really wanting to be passionate about it, but being afraid of being attacked because I have PTSD issues. And if that makes any sense, like in my real life, if you were in front of me and somebody were attacking, I don't care, color, spectrum of the rainbow, whatever, I would never stand there and let somebody be attacked. But in the bigger picture, how do you be a good ally without having like the whole internet coming at you, because I see it and it's so toxic out there. And that's like, I don't handle that well, I guess. So I don't know the tools to do the right thing when so many people have opinions on what you can say and can't say as an ally, what's the right approach. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I thank you for adding that layer. You may want to disengage from social media. If you find it to be toxic or harmful, you just might not want to reside in that space. All right, so we are going to move on to part 2, where we talk about durability. And Lynn, thank you, because that's actually a good segue. What do you do when things get uncomfortable? Do you stop being an ally? Do you change the way your allyship looks? And is that still being and we had a lot of discussions in the planning meeting, and one of the discussions was, can you be a bad ally? Or does that mean you're no longer an ally? Which I think is interesting. And as we reflect on the life of and legacy of Dr. King, I just think it was really interesting the way people are so quick to come out and post a Dr. King quote and to celebrate his life, etc. So the clip we're going to look at, I want to say the first either 10 or 15 minutes. It's 30 minutes long. I'll put the link in because you're probably going to watch the full thing. But it's of Tavis Smiley, who wrote the book Death of a King, that focuses on the last year of Dr. King's life. And he said, and he'll talk more about it, that Dr. King was deified in death, but he was demonized in life. And it really made me think about, what do our allyships look like and how durable are they? All right, so I'm going to share my screen and we'll watch the first part of the video.
Everyone knows that Martin Luther King Jr. was the leader of the nonviolent civil rights movement. He gave the famous "I Have a Dream" speech on the National Mall. He was killed by an assassin's bullet April 4th, 1968. Dr. King never lived an easy life, but that last year of his life was pretty difficult for him. He struggled with dissension among his own supporters, serious setbacks to his cause, and of course, attacks from his enemies. Tavis Smiley is a best-selling author and public radio and TV host. He's written the story of that final year of Dr. King's life in a book called Death of a King, and he joins me in the studio. Tavis, welcome.
Mamie, good to see you. Thanks for the opportunity.
You said that you wrote this book because you think that Dr. King is misunderstood. Mm-hmm. How so?
He has been so sanitized and so sterilized over the years that the truth about who he really was, I think, is ultimately going to be irrecoverable if we don't start to change the narrative now. That is to say that that King is seen, as you suggested a moment ago, as a dreamer. I think some people think Dr. King only gave one speech in his whole life. And then they think the speech only had one line in it, that I want my children to live in a nation where they'll not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. That's all we know from that one speech. That's 1963. King, although dead too young at the age of 39, lives 5 years after 1963. He evolves on any number of things. And the last year of his life happens to be the darkest and most difficult period of his life. And you don't get to know Mamie or Tavis or whoever you are. You don't get to know yourself until you have to traverse the difficult and dark days of your life. So if you think you know Dr. King and you don't know the journey of his last year, then you really don't know him yet.
Your book opens with an anti-Vietnam War speech Dr. King gave in New York City, exactly 1 year before his assassination. Why was that speech so significant?
Significant because it was the most controversial talk that he ever gave, number one. As you intimated in your brilliant introduction, King always had pushback, but nothing like what he received the day after delivering that speech. So he gives this speech beyond Vietnam, April 4, 67. He's dead literally 1 year to the day later, April 4, 1968. So this book, the first time ever, looks at just that last year, literally, of his life. And in this speech beyond Vietnam, Dr. King calls America the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. Now imagine that. A Black man in the 60s saying to America, you, America, are the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today.
But why did he go
well
there?
A lot of people.
Why did he go there, Tavis? I mean, it's not really related to civil rights.
And there were people who complained about that. What they basically said was, Negro, we have given you license to talk about civil rights, but foreign policy is not your bailiwick. King was saying that budgets are moral documents, and they were saying, you don't tell us how to prioritize federal spending. King was saying that war is the enemy of the poor. The bombs you're dropping in Vietnam are landing in the ghettos and barrios of American cities. And they hadn't given Martin license to move outside of that lane. He was not going to be boxed in. He was against violence here. He was against violence there, as in Vietnam, and against violence everywhere.
And it was his own supporters that were telling him, don't go there, Martin, don't go there.
Not just telling him that, you're right. In his own organization, SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the only organization he founded in his lifetime, his own board of directors, Mamie, voted to condemn him essentially for his position so publicly against the war in Vietnam. His own board of directors pushed back on him. And so he was catching hell and hate from the inside and from the outside. So the inside, he called his own team a team of wild horses. He couldn't get his team inside to support him, but on the outside, the day after that speech for the next year, everything and everybody turns on him. The media turns on him. The White House, the Johnson administration turns on him. White folk turn on him. The last poll in his life, the Harris poll, found that 75% of the American people thought he was irrelevant in the last year of his life. Almost 60% of Black people, 60% of his own people, thought he was persona non grata. So everything and everybody shifts against him.
I find that so hard to believe.
I know.
Irrelevant for Martin Luther King?
I feel the same way. In the research, it is mind-boggling to read what Black folks said about him, what the Black press said about him, but the white liberal press, I mean, Fox News wasn't around then. We can imagine what Fox News might have said. But this is the liberal press. When you read today, almost 50 years later, Mamie, what the New York Times, the Washington Post, Time Magazine said about him, it is embarrassing, humiliating, and it's just shameful. And it makes you sad to read what they said about him.
So did he regret having gone there? Did he regret that speech?
Not for one moment. Did not regret it at all. Did not realize that the pushback was going to be that severe. He knew he'd get some, he knew he'd have some haters, if we can say in the common vernacular. He knew he had some haters, but he didn't know the pushback was going to be so universal and so vitriolic and so ugly. And the next day, when you read again what the press said about him, and then the Black press turns on him, and then everybody else turns on him, it was a very, very difficult last mile of the way for him from 67 to 68.
So do you think that it was a bad idea in hindsight for him to be so public against the war?
Not at all. I think that you have to seek the truth and speak the truth and stand on the truth and stay with the truth. I'm constantly saying that to young people. You have to dedicate and commit your life to always being in a search for truth. You have to find the truth. Now, you understand that, you don't have a monopoly on the truth. There is the truth and there's the way to the truth. And we're always on the way to the truth. But once you seek it and you come into the knowledge of it, you seek it and then you must speak it and you stand on it and you stay with it. Now, 50 years after his death, practically, who was right? King was right. So he'd been deified in death, but we demonized him in life.
Tavis Smiley's in the studio.
All right. So in the interest of time, I am going to cut it a little short, but I will put the link to the clip. It's about 30 minutes in total. I think it would be a great use of your time. So the next section that we want to move into is thinking about, we've talked about allyship. We've talked about durability of allyship, and even many turned their back on Dr. King. The next question that we want to pose is, who are we pushing out of our coalitions or never letting in? And I have a string of 4 videos that I would like to share. Let me pause and put that in the chat for that video. It's really good. So let me... All right, so that is done. So we are going to see 4 remaining videos, and they represent types of people that we may be pushing out of our coalition. So I'll play them back to back, and then we'll open the floor for our remaining time to have a discussion. So the first person that's highlighted is Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray. She was a poet, a preacher, an intellectual, also wrapped in a female queer body. So is she someone who would be comfortable or welcome in our racial and social justice coalitions? The next person that we'll visit is Mamie Till Mobley. There is a clip on her and her decision to make her son Emmett Till's funeral an open casket, and what was her role in the movement? And the question is, do we push away people who have experienced unspeakable pain because their pain makes us uncomfortable? And we don't want to be uncomfortable, definitely. Next, we will view Claudette Colvin. Many of us may not be familiar with Claudette Colvin. She is a young woman who refused to give up her seat on a segregated bus about 9 months before Rosa Parks. And she was not highlighted. Remember, soon after Miss Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat, there were the bus boycotts, etc. She was not chosen by the movement to be the person that started that type of push, because she was young, Black, unmarried, and pregnant. And the movement did not want to deal with the complications of her refusal to give up her seat. So they just kind of waited until they had someone who was more palatable, someone who was light-skinned, an educated professional woman. And then we started the bus boycotts. And then the final person that we will look at is Bayard Rustin. Do we push out people with controversial lifestyles? So we are going to visit each of these 4, and then we will open the floor for discussion after. And again, I will play them back to back.
Then the call came. Emmett's body had been found. And Mamie started crying and yelling, and we didn't know what had happened. The grief in the house, the sadness in the house was horrible. The screaming, the disbelief. Mamie was just devastated. It was hard to see her heart broken. But she had to pull herself together because she had to get the mechanisms in place to bring him back to Chicago.
Now, the Tallahatchie County Sheriff, H.C. Strider, orders that Emmett's body be buried immediately before the sun sets that day. The grave is actually being dug when Mamie gets the information that they're about to bury her son in Mississippi.
First of all, why is the sheriff even making that decision? When have you heard of a sheriff deciding that the body should be buried? There's something really, really that they're trying to hide here. For his mom, that was an immediate red flag. She set off a domino effect.
Miss Mamie began to call everybody she knew. She called the governor, she called Mayor Daley, she called everybody she could touch, and finally got them engaged to bring the child home.
The stopping of the burial came from Illinois. Chicago Mayor Daley, who had just become a mayor, they stepped up and got that stopped.
The same train that took Emmett down, the city of New Orleans train, brought his remains back to Chicago.
The night they brought Emmett's body back from Mississippi, everybody went down to the train station.
The body came in, understand, a wooden sealed box.
Her uncle and authorities had signed an agreement that the casket would be sealed. Why would Mississippi want a sealed casket?
Emmett's mother said, well, give me a crowbar, give me whatever. What can they do to me? They've taken my son.
What could they charge me with anyway? Breaking and entering? I didn't care. The Mississippi officials were the ones with something to hide. What on earth was it? What was I about to witness?
It's powerful, and it was history changing. That one little act of, I'm gonna see my son, I'm gonna see my son's face, literally changed history as we know it.
Hi everyone, George Stephan.
Well, she may not be well known, but 82-year-old Claudette Colvin is an important part of U.S. history. 66 years ago, she was arrested in segregated Alabama for refusing to give up her seat on a bus to a white woman. That incident happened 9 months before Rosa Parks. David Begnaud sat down with Colvin and spoke to her about a new development in her story.
Meeting assistants now. It's very nice to meet you. Claudette Colvin has spent most of her 82 years as a convicted juvenile delinquent who would go on to college, work as a nurse's aide, and raise 2 sons. Do you think of yourself as an important figure in history?
No, I think of myself as a survivor of the civil rights struggle.
Her place in the civil rights struggle began when she was 15 years old, at the back of a crowded Montgomery, Alabama bus after school with 3 friends.
I was sitting in the session that was allowed for colored people, and this white lady came. The bus driver demanded for the 4 seats.
And this is you and 3 others?
Students, yes.
So 3 of them got up?
Yes.
And you refused?
So I refused. Because this wasn't an elderly white lady, this was a young white lady.
You're sitting there, your classmates get up and move.
Yes.
What was going through your head as to why you refused to stand?
I said, I could not move because history had me glued to the seat. And they said, how is that? I said, well, it felt as though Harriet Tubman hands were pushing me down on one shoulder, and Sojourner Truth's hand was pushing me down on the other shoulder.
Now that happened 9 months before Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus, overshadowing for decades what a teenager had also done.
And the traffic patrolman came to the rear of the bus and asked me why I wasn't sitting there. I told him I was sitting there because I paid my fare and it's my constitutional rights.
Now, watching this interview from a nearby room was Judge Calvin Williams. Today, he is the presiding judge of the Montgomery Family Court. And then what happened?
Oh, lo and behold, 2 squad car patrolmen stopped and, cut the bus off. And they stopped and we said, oh my.
We invited the judge to listen in and hear Colvin's account of what the police did to her in 1955.
And he asked me why I wasn't sitting there. And I was even more defiant. And I said, I paid my fare and it's my constitutional rights. He said, constitutional rights? And no. And they put me in the squad car and they handcuffed me through the window.
Claudette Colvin was jailed, charged with disturbing the peace, breaking segregation law, and found guilty of assaulting police officers, clawing them with her fingernails.
They said I clawed the policeman and I kicked the police. I didn't do all of that.
Was it the one and only time in your life that you've gone to jail?
Yes.
At the time, I represented
Claudette Colvin, there was no Rosa Parks case.
As a young attorney, Fred Gray, later portrayed by Cuba Gooding Jr. in the film Selma, took up her case. That's before he went on to defend Rosa Parks. In his book, he pays tribute.
The whole history of the civil rights movement may have been different, but for Claudette.
At the age of 16, she made headlines again as one of 4 plaintiffs in the lawsuit that would end Alabama's bus segregation in the landmark Browder versus Gale Supreme Court decision. When you won in court,
Yes.
you could sit in the front row if you wanted.
Yes.
And did you?
Yes.
But the charge of assaulting police officers remained. Fast forward to today. When Judge Calvin Williams in Montgomery, Alabama read her appeal, he expunged her 66-year-old criminal record.
And I'm no longer a juvenile delinquent at 82.
She was not present when the judge ruled. She didn't know his name. She didn't even know what he looked like. We have a surprise.
It was a surprise.
We have a surprise for you.
What is a surprise?
Someone would like to meet you.
Hello, Ms. Colvin. Judge Calvin Williams.
Oh, wow, 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 wow.
Judge Calvin Williams.
Oh, my
Got brown shoes.
Oh, Lord. Oh, my goodness.
On behalf of myself and all of the judges of Montgomery, offer my apology for an injustice that was perpetrated upon you.
Oh, this is a surprise.
All right. So 4 video clips for very different individuals. And the question is, who are we pushing out of our coalitions? Why? And is that a good idea? So I am going to pause. I will put all of the video links in the chat. For Miss Mamie Till Mobley, there's actually a 6-part series. We just watched one of those through YouTube, which is not to be confused with Mothers of the Movement, which was playing, I believe, on ABC. But if you are interested in learning more about her story, I will put that in the link as well.
One of your questions, Amy, was, is it a good idea to exclude people from the movement? I can't think of a time when it ever is a good idea to exclude people from the movement for whatever reason.
Then why do we do it so consistently? And anyone can share on that.
Discomfort.
So thanks for playing along, Neil. So is our discomfort more important than the progression of the movement? And if yes, what does that say about us?
Adolfo has his hand.
Please go ahead and unmute.
Adolfo, do you want to unmute?
Okay, I am on mute. Sorry.
Would you like to share?
No, I didn't write down anything. Sorry. Maybe.
Okay, no problem. I just muted myself. So how many of you were unfamiliar with some of the individuals that we highlighted in the 4 video clips? Or, okay, Gail, thank you for raising your hand there. Is there anything that you learned that resonated with you? Can you transfer kind of that experience to coalitions that you may be involved in. And again, are we pushing people out? And if yes, why? So much like what Tavis Smiley shared about the final year of Dr. King's life, when people get too progressive or too out of line with what we are comfortable with, it's easy to turn our back. And who suffers from that? And is it worth it? All right, we have lots of question marks in the chat. I will start with Lynn. Go ahead, please.
I'm wondering if part of the reason people might be left out would be just because people don't understand. And sometimes maybe they would leave someone out because they don't understand somebody's story or where they come from. Like I know the LGBTQIA, there's so much people are learning now. So if people are not understanding of things, maybe that would be part of the reason people would be left out. So learning, the more everybody learns about each other, the more inclusive everybody will become.
I think that could be the case. Sometimes the more you learn about a person, the more you want to keep them out. And is that okay? And who pays the consequence for that? And there could be more than one answer to that response. Thank you for sharing, Lynn. Steve, go ahead and unmute, please.
A lot of times it's simply a political calculation. Every group is going to make certain political calculations. What is going to be the impact of somebody that becomes the distraction? Does it sideline the movement? Does it? Anyway, those calculations are difficult. And how do you manage them? And how do you include folks? And yet, how do you keep on track with what goals are trying to be achieved? It can be just difficult.
Steve, thank you for sharing. Adolfo, did you mean to put a question mark in the chat? If yes,
yes, this time I did.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Well, it's just for the record, I moved to the United States about in 2004, and I started learning about African American culture until maybe 2012. So, because we don't have that much access to that part of history, so just and like at this point, I knew about just a few of the important people, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks, but I am talking about maybe 10 years knowing a little bit more. It's just, and I went to take English classes here, which they never teach us anything about African Americans. They tell us about American history, but the African American part never go into that history, or Native American either. That's
well, yeah, Adolfo, thank you for sharing. Unfortunately, I am not surprised by that. So yeah, that's why self-learning and being intellectually curious is so important if you seek to have genuine allyship and to be in relationship with people who are different from you. So we have a few minutes left before we go into announcements. Hopefully you consider this hour plus time well spent. Any final comments, questions, things that resonated, things you want to explore more, anything that you're looking at a little differently now? We have time for a couple of responses.
This is Jill, and I wanted to recommend a very positive book. I just found this at the library today.
It's upside
Amanda
down.
Gorman, who spoke at Joe Biden's inauguration. And it's a book of poems. Whoops, upside down. It's called Call Us What We Carry by Amanda Gorman.
All right, Jill, thank you for that book recommendation. Much appreciated. Angel, I see you have a question mark in the chat. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I have a question. So we're talking about being an ally to marginalized groups and everything. So like what would you do, or, you know, in a situation like the one that we find ourselves in right now, where you say I'm a part of a marginalized group and I disagree with a lot of what's been said by you. I don't agree that I'm part of a marginalized group or that I've been oppressed. And yet, you know, people are to be allies, they have to hear and agree with what I say, but then you're on the other side saying that what I'm saying is wrong. So what do they do in that situation?
Angel, I'm not really clear on what specific situation you're referring to, so I'm not sure if I'll be able to answer your question. But if you'll let me finish, please.
I think hold on, Angel is saying.
No, hold on. But I at no point this evening said that you were wrong.
You said that I am part of an oppressed group, and I said I wasn't.
Okay, I believe that you are, and it's completely fine for you to believe that you're not.
So my question is, what are the people that you want to be allies? What are you like? Would you want them to agree with me that Hispanic people aren't an oppressed group or marginalized group in America?
Again, I don't think I'm clear on what your question is. Neil, you were going to try to provide some clarity. If you could unmute, maybe you can be helpful.
Angel, or is it Angel?
Either one is fine. I respond to either one. Yeah.
Angel, I think that you're saying that what you hear is that everybody needs to believe the same thing in order to be allies. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm asking is, in a situation where you have two, I'm using the terms that you've been using, marginalized people, or right, that are saying two different things. I'm saying, no, I'm not, like, I don't believe that you as white people have this, are my oppressors. And yet what Amy has been saying and what we've heard from some of the videos and other things that have been said today is that white people are Hispanic people's oppressors. And I that's not true. I don't think that's true. So how are you how are you going to be an ally to me when I say, no, there is no such thing as that?
So Angel, if I could jump in and hopefully provide some clarity. One, you and I do not have to have the same allies, and that's perfectly fine. And two, I am not saying that if that is the way you understood it, that all white people are oppressors of marginalized communities. I think that the construct of the system that we live in is oppressive towards marginalized communities. That's just my belief. If you could just let me finish.
Go ahead.
You don't have to share that opinion, and I think that's okay. And again, people are not universal allies to everyone who believes or doesn't believe that they're marginalized. So it's completely fine for us to have different allies. So hopefully that provided some clarity.
Not really, because I think like what appears to me like the bent of this conversation has been to, as I believe you said during this past hour and a half, right, is like we want the people in privilege, and you said white people are the privileged people in this situation, right? We want them to understand what the marginalized people and to come into them and to listen to them, not even like try to make themselves a part of that oppression because they can't understand it or whatever. And so you've grouped white people as like the privileged people and everybody else as the oppressed. And I'm saying that I don't see that. And then, so if the privileged people are supposed to listen to the oppressed, what do you do when the quote unquote oppressed like disagree and don't see it the same way? Like, how do you find the truth in that?
I encourage you to embrace your truth, Angel. We can agree to disagree, and that is part of courageous conversations, to expect and accept non-closure. But
so, I have a question though about that.
Hold on. Janelle does have her hand up, so I'm going to move to Janelle. I would encourage you to stay for the parking lot, which starts at 7. Hopefully we'll make that 7. And it's another 30 minutes of unmoderated discussion. So feel free to stay on and share more at that time. Janelle, thanks for being patient.
Can you hear me first off? I think, Angel, what I'm hearing you say, I understand what you're saying. And I think as somebody who just wants to embrace and understand marginalized groups, part of that is also understanding that they are not monolithic. So your experience is very different from Amy's, would be very different from, my neighbors down the street. So if there's a conversation that I want to be in on, to talk to Amy about her experience or have her share things, I'm going to listen to that, and I'm going to take what I can from that experience, and also from yours. I take what you say and I hear you, and I think we can all kind of move on from there with better understanding.
So Janelle, thank you for that. And again, Angel, to take you back to our title, and for everyone else who has joined us this evening, is you can't have allyship without relationship. And those relationships look different depending on the people and the groups of people you are in relationship with. And we definitely want to hold space for different opinions and valuing those different opinions. So we are running out of time. I put my updates in the chat. If you missed the MLK commemoration, the link is there. Anyone who is interested in attending our winter lunch and learn, we're going to focus on the Race to Equity Rock County report, the education portion. The link is there. And then I also dropped the link for the actual report. Neil, are there any diversity action team announcements?
Yes, there are. I just want to say that I noticed that Adolfo had a question mark in the discussion, and I hope you'll stay around, Adolfo, and make your comment after we give these announcements. The Diversity Action program is going to be announced by Renee Bew.
Yes, and actually, I was trying to put some information in the chat, but I think I might have to redo it. So I will give you a brief synopsis and then put it in there. So the title is Silence Speaks, Making Space for Critical Youth and Adult Conversations Around Racial Equity and Social Justice. It will be Thursday, February 17th at 6 p.m. via Zoom. I do have the link to register for that, just like you did for Courageous Conversations. And that will be in the chat with the other information that I am sharing.
Perfect. I thought I saw Beth on earlier. Beth, are there any community action announcements before I pass the baton to Neil to open up the parking lot? Oh, I think Beth may have left the call.
Yeah, but Julie is here. Julie is here.
Julie, could you share any announcements from community action?
Yeah, I know that Mark is going to be doing more diversity work in like Edgerton schools, and I think possibly Beloit. And another thing people might be interested in is that the Homeless Intervention Task Force will be doing their point in time count this week. And so they're always looking for volunteers. And if you're interested, they have a Facebook page. I'll try and get the link in here, but I don't know if I have enough time. But Otherwise, you can call Jessica at Echo if you're interested and want to know more about this.
But in terms of time, we can still use chat until 7:30, right, Amy?
Yep, that's correct.
The program is not, the program's not going to be recorded after we sign off, but we still have another half hour where we can use chat.
Well, you don't know how slow I can be, Neil, but thank you for having confidence in me.
All right, Neil, the floor is yours to officially end this discussion and transition us into the parking lot.
Okay.